deal with the militias as a de facto authority. This means that oppression, the violations of freedoms, this behavior we will not be able to eradicate this behavior easily. We know that the Houthi militias only use peace agreements as a way in order to delay further and acquire further resources. This is why they shirked previous agreements, the latest of which the Stockholm Agreement. Therefore, we reaffirm the need to have the right guarantees for peace. It should be based on the 3 terms of references that were agreed upon at the national, regional, and international levels. We need to respect international legitimacy pursuant to the Saudi initiative. Furthermore, a sustainable peace should be based on justice, fairness, and addressing pending key national issues. Any peace agreement or any measures to build trust, they should be able to achieve tangible results in order to alleviate the suffering of the Yemeni people so that we can make sure that those who benefit are the victims of the conflict, notably women and children. Sustaining peace and ending the war. This is the only way to guarantee that the Yemeni people will be able to build their state institutions that guarantee and protect their rights and freedoms and equality among citizens. And also build good neighborly relations with our brethren in the GCC countries. Today, I believe there is a path, a short path towards peace by rekindling the trust of the Yemeni people in international legitimacy and in their national government. For that to happen, we need to support the legal government. We need to strengthen the economy so that the government can provide services, so that we can put an end to the militias, so that we can build a brighter future promoted by UN envoys everywhere. I also believe that our international system must protect international peace and stability. It should support the will of the people and their national governments. This could be achieved today easily with the ease of access to information, with determining facts. However, we need to prioritize the will of the people so that we can strengthen their trust in this institution and the international community. We are not trying to shirk our responsibilities or to blame the international community for our failures. No, we need to believe that superpowers should send a strong message to militias, not only in Yemen, but all over the world, that they should not overturn constitutional legitimacies, so that we can end any wishes armed groups could have to establish entities that compete with legitimate governments. Mr. President, Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, to restore trust and achieve progress in the Yemeni dossier, we must recognize that a track based on international humanitarian intervention should be reconsidered and should be addressed so that it is in line with international law and efforts to combat terrorism, rebellion, and armed groups. We welcome the efforts of the United Nations to move from relief interventions in my country towards sustainable development. This transformation should also include financial pledges through the Yemeni Central Bank, the recognized Yemeni Central Bank, in order to strengthen our national currency and to make sure that these funds do not fall in the hands of armed militias. This track contradicts with the international rhetoric which calls for an improvement in the Yemeni economic indicators at a time when their international operations are going through institutions under the control of Houthi militias. Although Houthi militias continue with their arbitrary measures to violate the independence of the banking sector, the confidentiality of its operations, and to turn this sector into a network for laundering money.
يترك مؤسسات الدولة
Moving
العضو في
forward
الأمم
with this
المتحدة
approach
بجاهزية
means
ضعيفة
that
ونقص في
the
التمويل
institutions of
وموارد
Yemen,
غير
this
كافية
member state and
للتعامل
the
مع
United
التحديات
Nations
العابرة
will remain
للحدود
weak,
والاحتياجات الإنسانية
will remain
المتزايدة في البلاد.
underfunded, and will not have the necessary resources to deal with these cross-border challenges. Furthermore, these policies could further feed the war economy, will allow for the flow of funds through banking channels that are not accountable.
يثبت أن دعمها في تحسين الخدمات
The humanitarian intervention of the Yemeni government proves that this support improves basic services to save the lives of millions of men, women, and children, to strengthen the prospects for peace. We choose to promote development and prosperity and not violence, death, and hatred as Houthi militias do. From this very rostrum last year, I have said that every delay from the international community to be more firm when it comes to the Yemeni dossier, the losses will be greater, and Houthi militias will continue with their cross-border threats. They will continue to commit grave violations of human rights, the same human rights that this institution has been promoting for the last 70 years. This year, we have witnessed an increase in the threats of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, supported by Houthi militias and by the Iranian regime with money, weapons, and intelligence support. They also share the same Takfiri ideology. As I have said a year ago from this very rostrum, the public budget of our state showed great indicators since the start of the war. We were able to improve services, create job opportunities. However, this momentum stopped as a result of Houthi terrorist attacks against oil facilities.
أنه لولا الدعم السخي
الذي تلقته الحكومة الشهر الماضي من الأشقاء في المملكة العربية السعودية من خلال منحة مالية قيمتها $1.2 مليار دعما للموازنة العامة للدولة، لكانت الحكومة قد عجزت عن الوفاء بالتزاماتها الأساسية بما في ذلك عدم القدرة على دفع رواتب الموظفين ونموه أيضا. في هذا السياق بالتمويلات والتعهدات الإنسانية والإنمائية من الأشقاء في دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة والأصدقاء في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية ودول الاتحاد الأوروبي والمملكة المتحدة وباقي الشركاء الإقليميين والدوليين. رغم كل هذه التدخلات الإنسانية أعود للإحاطة بأن الميليشيات الحوثية صعدت مؤخرا تهديداتها باستهداف خطوط الملاحة البحرية في البحر الأحمر وباب المندب وخليج عدن، واعتبارها مناطق عسكرية ملوحة باعتبار أسلحة جديدة في الجزر اليمنية واستهداف السفن التجارية وناقلات النفط، ما يؤكد استمرار هذه الميليشيات ومن خلفها النظام الإيراني That means that these militias, supported by the Iranian regime, continue to destabilize the region, to undermine efforts in order to renew the truce and resume the political process. And today, they flaunt their military capabilities on the 21st of September, which is the day when they overturned the legitimate government. Today, we reaffirm the need to guarantee the freedom of international navigation to combat extremism, terrorism, piracy, and support measures to prevent the proliferation of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction, notably the Iranian nuclear weapon, their ballistic missiles, and their role in sabotaging the region. We call on the international community to condemn these blatant Iranian interventions in the affairs of my country and to submit it to sanctions pursuant to resolutions of international legitimacy. In this regard, we call on member states to commit to the arms embargo and to prevent Iran from providing its militias with military capabilities such as ballistic missiles and drones used to launch terrorist attacks against
السادة المندوبين
innocent
يؤكد
civilians.
مجلس القيادة الرئاسي والحكومة
The Presidential
التزامهم
Leadership
الصارم
Council
بكافة
and the
الاتفاقيات
government remain
والمعاهدات الدولية
committed to all
بما في ذلك
international
حماية
agreements
الأطفال
and conventions,
ومنع إشراكهم في النزاع
including the
المسلح
protection of
كما
children,
يلتزم
and to make sure
بتوفير
that they do not
الضمانات اللازمة
participate in the
لعمل
armed
المنظمات
conflict. We
الدولية
also
وتسهيل
provide the
وصول
necessary
تدخلاتها إلى
guarantees for
مستحقيها
the
في
work of
مختلف أنحاء اليمن.
international
ولتعزيز
organizations
هذه
and make
الجهود
sure
تعمل
to
الحكومة على
facilitate the
تمكين اللجنة
delivery of
الوطنية
assistance to all
المستقلة
those in need.
للتحقيق في ادعاءات انتهاكات حقوق
We have
الإنسان
also established an
والآليات الدولية
independent
والأممية
national
ذات الصلة
committee to
من الوفاء
investigate an
بمهامها
allegations
دون
of
قيد أو
violations
شرط
of human
وهو
rights.
ما يدفعنا إلى الإشارة بأن كافة التفاهمات التي وقعتها وكالات الأمم المتحدة مع الميليشيات الحوثية
The
لم تجد
UN
حتى
with
الآن
Houthi
طريقها للتنفيذ حيث تستمر
have not been
في تجديد
implemented
الأطفال
yet.
وتعبئتهم إلى
The
معسكرات
Houthi militias
القتال على
continues to recruit children and to send them to battlefields in full view of the international
انتهاكات
community.
الميليشيات الحوثية الجسيمة
Houthi militias
لحقوق الإنسان
violate
بما في
human
ذلك
rights
القيود على
daily.
سفر
They
وعمل
impose
تعليم المرأة
restriction
وقمع
on travel,
الصحفيين.
work and the
السيد
education of
الرئيس
women. They oppress
تؤكد الجمهورية
and
الجمهورية
kidnap
اليمنية
journalists.
على موقفها الثابت تجاه القضية الفلسطينية والدفع
would
بمسار
like
السلام قدما نحو
to
حل عادل
reaffirm our
وشامل
position,
للقضية
our firm position
اليمنية على
regarding the
أساس قرارة
Palestinian
للقضية
issue.
الفلسطينية
We will
على أساس
continue to
قرارة
support the
الشرعية
path
الدولية
towards
ومبادرة
peace,
السلام
towards
العربية
a
بما
comprehensive
يكفل حق
and
الشعب
just
الفلسطيني
solution for
في
this
إقامة دولته
Palestinian
المستقلة.
issue on the
كما
basis
نؤكد دعمنا
of
لكافة
resolutions of
المساعي الرامية
international
لإحلال
legitimacy
السلام في
and the Arab
السودان
peace
وفي
initiative in a
المقدمة
way
جهود
that would
المملكة العربية
guarantee
السعودية
that the
وجمهورية
Palestinian
مصر
people
العربية
will be able to
والولايات
establish their
المتحدة
independent
بما يعيد
state. We
لهذا
also
البلد العزيز
support
الأمن
peace in the
والاستقرار
Sudan,
والتنمية
and we
كما لا
support the
يفوت
efforts of
بالتعبير
the
عن
Kingdom
كامل
of Saudi
التضامن
Arabia,
وخالص العزاء
Egypt and the
للأشقاء
US
في
in
ليبيا
this regard, so
والمملكة
that
المغربية
this
بوحايل
country
الأعاصير
can once
والزلازل
again
المدمرة
enjoy
التي
security and
ضربت
stability.
البلدين
We also
الشقيقين
express our condolences
ونجدد شكرنا
to Libya and
وتقديرنا
the Kingdom
لكافة
of
الأشقاء
Morocco
لدعم
for the victims of the tornadoes and earthquakes, and we thank the countries that supported both countries, especially Egypt, as we witness an increase in the risk of climate change. I thank you. May the peace, mercy, and blessings of God be upon you.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Presidential Leadership Council of the Republic of Yemen for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Faustin Archange Touadera, Head of State of the Central African Republic. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Faustin Archange Touadera, Head of State of the Central African Republic, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Monsieur le Président
Mr. President
de l'Assemblée générale,
of
Mesdames
the
et
General
Messieurs,
Assembly, ladies and gentlemen,
la 78e
the
session
78th
de l'Assemblée
session
générale
of the General Assembly
de l'Organisation des
of the
Nations
United
Unies,
Nations Organization
à laquelle je
is
participe
one I am attending
au nom de mon
on
pays, la
behalf of
République
my country, the
centrafricaine,
Central African Republic.
m'offre
It provides me
l'heureuse occasion de
with a
réaffirmer
felicitous opportunity
notre
to
inflexible
reaffirm
détermination
our staunch determination to contribute
à la recherche
to
de
the
solutions
quest
communes
for
aux
common
défis de
solutions
l'humanité.
to the challenges faced by
Monsieur le
humankind.
Président,
Mr. President,
avant d'apporter la contribution de mon pays au débat
making my
général,
address by way of my
je
country's
voudrais,
contribution to the
du haut
general
de cette
debate, I
tribune des
wish
Nations Unies,
from this high
symbole
rostrum
par
of the United
excellence
Nations,
de la solidarité
symbol
humaine,
par excellence of human solidarity,
exprimer
I wish to
la
express
solidarité
the
du peuple
solidarity of
centrafricain
the CAR people
au peuple frère du
to the
Maroc,
brotherly peoples
et
of
de la Libye,
Morocco and Libya,
durement
who have
frappés
been
par des
devastated
catastrophes
by natural
naturelles
disasters
ayant entraîné
which
des
have
milliers de pertes en vies
produced
humaines et des dégâts matériels inestimables
material damage
quelques
which is
jours
incalculable
avant
indeed,
l'ouverture de
and have
notre
also
session.
claimed thousands of lives. This occurred just a few days
Comme je l'ai
before the
soutenu en
opening of
d'autres
our
occasions,
session. As I have underscored
les
on
conséquences
other
dramatiques de ces
occasions,
catastrophes
the tragic
naturelles
consequences of these
doivent
natural
interpeller
disasters
la
must
communauté
draw the
scientifique
attention
mondiale
of the world
sur
scientific
l'urgence
community to the urgent need
d'identifier
to
les régions
pinpoint
du
the
monde
regions of the world which
particulièrement
are
vulnérables
particularly
à des
vulnerable
événements
to
climatiques
extreme
extrêmes
climate events,
et de mettre à la
and must
disposition
prompt
des
them
États concernés
to make available
les
to the states
informations
concerned
nécessaires
the necessary
afin
information
d'en limiter les
to
dégâts.
limit the damage caused by
Par
such
ailleurs,
events. Moreover,
le monde entier
the
a
entire
suivi
world
avec une profonde consternation
followed
l'arrivée
with
massive
great
ces derniers jours
dismay in recent
des
days
milliers
the
de
arrival
migrants
en
africains
masse of thousands of African
l'île de
migrants
Lampedusa,
to the
en
island of
Italie.
Lampedusa in Italy.
Ces jeunes
These young
qui
people
représentent le présent
represent
et
the
l'avenir
present
de
and
notre
the
continent,
future of our
l'Afrique,
continent of Africa.
cherchent
They
désespérément
are seeking
à rejoindre les
desperately
pays du continent
to
européen
reach the
à la
European
recherche
continent
d'un
in
Eldorado.
search of a promised land.
Cette escalade de la
This
crise des migrants
escalation of the migrant
est
crisis
l'une des conséquences
is one
effroyables
of the
des pillages des
terrifying
ressources naturelles
consequences
des
of
pays
the
rendus pauvres
looting of the
par
natural
l'esclavage,
resources
la
owned by the
colonisation
countries made
et
poor by
l'impérialisme
slavery,
occidental, le
colonialism
terrorisme
and
et les
Western
conflits
imperialism,
armés
as well
internes,
as terrorism
souvent
and
ouverts
internal
sur
armed
fond
conflicts.
de
These
visées hégémoniques,
are often waged
des
in
tensions
furtherance of
géopolitiques
hegemonizing
et
agendas
géostratégiques
and
entre les
against a
grandes
backdrop
puissances
of
mondiales.
geopolitical and geostrategic tensions
Tout en
between
regrettant ce
major global
phénomène déshumanisant,
powers. Here
je
I
salue
do
la
mourn
solidarité
the
et
existence
les efforts inouïs
and
déployés par les
decry
pays
the existence
d'accueil
of this
et
dehumanizing
l'Organisation
phenomenon.
internationale
Nevertheless,
pour les
I
migrants
hail
fournir
solidarity and
l'assistance à ces
unprecedented
jeunes
efforts
dont
deployed by
les vies
host
sont mises
countries
en
and the
danger
IOM to
par
provide
des
assistance
passeurs
to
et
these young
vendeurs
people whose
d'illusions
very
sans
lives
foi
are
ni loi.
imperiled by smugglers
Toutefois,
and lawless
mon
dream
pays estime que l'ONU
merchants.
doit aller
However, my
au-delà
country
de notre
believes that
engagement
the
commun
UN must
à
go
raviver la
beyond our
solidarité
common
mondiale
commitment to
en
revitalize
impliquant les
global
pays
solidarity.
africains
It must
dans la
get
recherche des
African
solutions
countries on
globales
board in the search for
aux crises
global
migratoires
solutions to
et aux défis
migratory crises
existentiels
and to the
qui se posent aux
existential
jeunes du
challenges
continent
which
africain.
are facing the young people of the African
Monsieur le
continent.
Président,
Mr. President,
alors que nos
our
pays
countries
continuent de faire face
continue to
au chaos
face
climatique,
climate
aux
chaos,
tensions
to
géopolitiques
weather
et aux défis
geopolitical
financiers,
tensions and face
énergétiques
financial challenges,
et alimentaires sans
as
précédent,
well as
de
unprecedented
nouveaux
energy
défis
and
mondiaux
food crises.
se révèlent
At the
chaque
same
jour.
time, new
Aujourd'hui,
challenges are
en
appearing
Afrique comme ailleurs,
day after day on the
des
global
conflits,
horizon. Today in
symptômes des
Africa, as
tensions
elsewhere,
géopolitiques
conflicts,
géostratégiques
symptoms of
qui divisent les
geopolitical
grandes
and
puissances
geostrategic
sont ouverts.
tensions that divide the major powers
Au
are
Soudan,
plain to see.
Un
In
conflit armé
Sudan, an
interne d'une
internal
rare
armed
cruauté
conflict
a éclaté
rare
en avril
in its
2023,
cruelty erupted
alors même
in
que le
April
pays était sur la
2023.
voie de
And
la
that was at a time
normalisation
when the country
avec un
was
processus de
well
dialogue
on the way to
prometteur entre
normalization,
toutes les
with
forces
a
vives de
promising
la
process
nation.
of dialogue underway, bringing together
La
the
République
nation's key
centrafricaine
players. The
a
CAR has
déjà
already
enregistré 51 077 réfugiés soudanais et tchadiens
hosted
dans la préfecture de la
15,000
Vakaga,
Chadian and
exposant
Sudanese
ainsi nos
refugees in the
populations
Vakaga prefecture.
cette résilience
And our
à des
people
risques
are
d'aggravation de
resilient,
la situation
but
humanitaire
hosting those
encore
refugees means we are exposing
et
our people to a
d'insécurité.
worsening of the humanitarian
J'en appelle
situation, and
à
we
une prise en
risk seeing
considération
our
de l'impact
security
de cette
situation
crise
worsen further
sur
still.
la géopolitique
I
régionale
call upon you to
ainsi
take
qu'à la
account of the
solidarité
impact of this
internationale
crisis and
en
the
faveur
effect
des
it's
réfugiés.
having on regional
Pendant
geopolitics.
que nous
And
tenons cette
please
session,
show international
le
solidarity in
conflit
favor of our
russo-ukrainien
refugees.
se
Against the
poursuit sur le
backdrop of
terrain
this session, the
sans
Russian-Ukrainian
aucune
conflict
perspective de règlement
continues to
pacifique,
play out on the ground. There are
alors
no
que les
prospects for
conséquences
the
pour le
peaceful
monde
settlement of this
sont
consequence,
douloureuses
and that is in
et
spite of the
regrettables.
fact that the consequences of this conflict
Monsieur
for
le
the world
Président,
are painful
la
and deeply
persistance
unfortunate. Mr.
et la
President,
multiplication
the
des foyers de
persistence and
tension à
increase
travers
in the
le
number of
monde
hotbeds of tension
soulèvent
throughout the
des
world
interrogations
raise
quant à
questions about the
l'efficacité
effectiveness
de
of
certains
certain
mécanismes de
mechanisms
prévention
for
et de
the
règlement
prevention
pacifique
and
des
peaceful
différends de l'ONU,
settlement of disputes
dont
that
la
the UN
mission
has
première
at its
est de
disposal.
garantir la paix et la
The
sécurité
UN's primary
internationale.
mission is to
C'est
guarantee
pourquoi
international peace and
nous
security.
réaffirmons avec force la
These
position
question marks
africaine commune
are why we
sur la réforme du
forcefully
Conseil de
reaffirm
sécurité de l'ONU
the common African
afin
position
d'augmenter
regarding
le nombre
Security
des membres
Council
permanents
reform
et non permanents et d'accorder un siège permanent à l'Afrique. Et ce ne sera que justice. La République centrafricaine estime qu'il est urgent de réparer cette injustice historique subie par l'Afrique au regard des agendas importants tels que le sommet du futur en 2024 et le 80e anniversaire des Nations Unies en 2025 qui pourront être des occasions d'unir les pays membres afin de prendre des mesures concrètes pour la dite réforme. Monsieur le Président, la République centrafricaine s'interroge sur le point de savoir comment accélérer la réalisation de l'agenda 2030 en faveur de la paix, de la prospérité, du progrès et de la durabilité pour tous, lorsque certains États, du haut de leur puissance politique, économique et militaire, agitent en permanence la diplomatie coercitive ou instrumentalise les institutions financières internationales aux fins d'imposer des blocus économiques, financiers et commerciaux contre les pays rendus pauvres par l'esclavage, la colonisation et l'impérialisme. En effet, le 29 juillet 2023, le peuple centrafricain a appris avec une grande désolation la reconduction de l'embargo sur les armes, modifié par des rapports et exposé des motifs tronqués, avec une fallacieuse dérogation pour les forces de sécurité nationale. La République centrafricaine dénonce à la face du monde cette cynique décision qui trahit l'intention inavouée des membres du Conseil qui l'ont voté d'instrumentaliser les régimes de sanctions à des fins de pression politique sous l'égide de l'ONU. Je dois rappeler, pour le déplorer, que les embargos sur les armes et diamants, reconduits depuis 10 ans, auxquels s'ajoute la suspension des appuis budgétaires, constituent de réels obstacles à la réalisation par mon pays des objectifs de l'agenda 2030. Nous récusons ce déni de notre droit à l'autodétermination et la souveraineté permanente sur nos richesses et ressources naturelles, garanties par les instruments juridiques pertinents des Nations Unies. J'exhorte le Conseil de sécurité à faire cesser ces artifices qui visent à masquer la volonté de pérenniser l'insécurité et la mainmise sur les ressources naturelles du pays au profit des puissances étrangères, la légitimation des groupes armés et leur accorde le statut de sujet de droit international. Monsieur le Président, notre planète brûle. Notre planète se noie. Le monde s'effondre. Le monde pleure. Oui, chaque jour, les médias annoncent des catastrophes naturelles liées au dérèglement climatique qui s'apparentent à des signes annonciateurs de l'apocalypse. Paradoxalement, la confiance et la solidarité entre les nations, valeurs fondatrices des Nations Unies, se fracturent davantage, éloignant ainsi la communauté humaine de la réalisation des objectifs nobles de développement durable en faveur de la paix, de la prospérité, du progrès et de la durabilité pour tous, prévus dans le programme 2030. Pourtant, pour rétablir la confiance et raviver la solidarité face aux phénomènes climatiques dévastateurs, des engagements ont été pris par les pays développés, grands pollueurs, depuis l'accord de Paris, en passant par ceux de Glasgow et de Sharm el-Sheikh en Égypte. La COP27 en particulier a utilement fixé 4 grands objectifs que nous avons tous adoptés, à savoir l'atténuation, l'adaptation, le financement et une transition juste afin de faire face aux défis communs de l'humanité. Malheureusement, beaucoup de pays, dont la République centrafricaine, victimes innocentes des conséquences dramatiques de la surexploitation de la planète par les pays développés, ne bénéficient pas des promesses de financement faites. Monsieur le Président, Nous mesurons à sa juste valeur l'apport des partenaires,
of the
aussi
value
bien
of the
bilatéraux que
contributions made
multilatéraux,
by bilateral and
dans leur élan de
multilateral
solidarité envers
partners
l'Afrique,
in their desire
notre
to show
continent,
solidarity
et
towards
les en
Africa,
remercie
our
infiniment.
continent, and we thank them
Cependant,
for that
nous en appelons à un
support.
partenariat plus
However,
agissant,
we call for a more
évolutif et
dynamic,
diversifié,
diversified
respectueux de la souveraineté
and
des États,
agile partnership
des valeurs
which
culturelles
respects the
et
sovereignty
morales
of
de
states
tous.
and the cultural and
Ce
moral
n'est que de
values
cette
of
manière
all.
que nous
It is only
pouvons
in this
raviver
way
la
that we
flamme
will be able
de
to
l'amitié entre les
reignite the
peuples,
flame of friendship between
promouvoir la
peoples,
paix
to
et
promote
la
peace
sécurité,
and security,
créer les
and
conditions
to
d'un
create
développement équitable et
conditions
inclusif.
propitious to equitable and
Mon
inclusive
pays continue de
development. My
plaider
country
pour un
continues
multilatéralisme
to advocate
inclusif,
for an
pour une
inclusive
croissance mutuellement
multilateralism,
accélérée,
for
pour un ordre mondial
accelerated,
équilibré
expedited growth for
et pour
all,
que les différends
for
mondiaux
a
soient
global
relevés
balanced
en
order,
mettant un accent
and we
particulier
call for global
sur la paix et la
disputes to
sécurité
be
internationale, le
solved
respect de la souveraineté de
with
chaque
particular
État.
emphasis placed on international peace and
Je
security
voudrais saisir
and
cette
the
occasion
respect of the sovereignty
pour
of each and
dénoncer
every state. I like
toutes
to
les
avail
campagnes
myself
de
of this
désinformation et de
opportunity
dénigrement
to decry
menées par
all
certains
the
médias occidentaux
disinformation and
contre la
smear
République
campaigns
centrafricaine.
waged by certain Western media
Je
against
réaffirme
the
ici la
CAR.
détermination
Here,
de
I
mon pays
reaffirm my country's
à diversifier
determination
sa
to
coopération
diversify
internationale
its international
avec tous les pays qui le
cooperation
souhaitent
and extend
dans
it
les
to all
seuls
countries
intérêts
who wish to
vitaux de son
cooperate
peuple
with us with
et à
the
éviter
only
d'être
desire
entraîné dans
of
des
furthering the
compétitions
vital
entre
interests of
puissances
our
mondiales.
people and of avoiding
Monsieur le
competition
Président,
between global powers.
en
That's the
adoptant par
cooperation I
référendum
call for. Mr.
le
President,
30 juillet
on the
dernier, la
30th
nouvelle
of
constitution
July,
de la République
we
centrafricaine
adopted the new
à une
constitution
majorité
of the
écrasante
CAR. That was
de
adopted by an overwhelming
95,3%
majority of
et un taux de
95.3% of the
participation de plus de
population. There was a
57%.
turnout of over
Le peuple
57%.
centrafricain
And with that
vient
vote,
de réaffirmer
the
son
people of the
attachement
CAR
aux buts et
reaffirmed its
principes
commitment
énoncés
to the
dans la
purposes and
Charte de l'ONU,
principles set forth in the
son
United
droit
Nations Charter.
inaliénable au
They
respect de sa
reaffirmed their
souveraineté,
inalienable right
à
to the respect of
l'autodétermination,
their sovereignty, to
à la stabilité des
self-determination, to the
institutions,
stability of
à la paix,
institutions,
à la
to
sécurité,
peace, to
à l'unité
security,
nationale
to
et au
national
développement.
unity, and to development.
Pour accélérer la
To
réalisation du
speed
programme
up
2030
fulfillment of
et ses
Agenda
objectifs de
2030
développement
and its
durable en
sustainable
faveur de la
development
paix,
goals to bring
de la
about peace,
prospérité, du progrès
prosperity,
et de la
progress,
durabilité
and
pour tous.
sustainability for all.
Le gouvernement
The government
poursuit l'exécution
continues
de
to
l'accord
implement
politique
the
pour la paix
political agreement
et la
for
réconciliation
peace and
et de la
reconciliation.
feuille de route conjointe de Luanda
And we continue
s'investit
also
pour
to implement
renforcer
the Luanda
l'engagement
joint roadmap.
de toutes
We
les
are
parties prenantes.
striving to strengthen the
Dans le
commitment of
cadre de la
all
mise en œuvre de
stakeholders
ces
to these
instruments de paix et de
processes.
sécurité nationale,
As
9
part
groupes
of
armés
the
ont déjà été
implementation of
dissous.
these agreements for
Parallèlement,
peace and international security,
la Cour
9 armed
pénale
groups have
spéciale
already been
et les
dissolved. In
juridictions
parallel, the
ordinaires
Special
poursuivent
Criminal Court and
en
other
toute
ordinary
indépendance
courts
la lutte contre
independently
l'impunité.
continue their fight against
Je voudrais
impunity.
rappeler
I wish to
qu'au-delà
recall
de la
that beyond the
Constitution,
Constitution,
notre politique
our
nationale de
national policy
décentralisation
of decentralization
est à la fois une
is
aspiration
the
profonde
expression of a
du peuple
deeply harbored
centrafricain
will of the
et une
CAR.
composante essentielle
It
de
is
l'accord de
also an
paix
essential
et
component
de la feuille de route
of the
conjointe
peace
de Luanda.
agreement and of the Luanda joint
Je voudrais
roadmap.
relever
I wish to
tous les efforts
here
déjà
point
entrepris
to all of the
par
efforts already
l'autorité
undertaken
nationale
by
des
the
élections
National Electoral
avec le
Authority
soutien
with the
de
support
l'assistance technique internationale qui
international
nous ont
technical
permis de
assistance.
réévaluer
These efforts have
le
allowed us
calendrier
to
électoral
reassess
qui prévoit
the
désormais
timeline for
la tenue
elections.
des élections
Now,
locales pour le
local
mois
elections
d'octobre
are scheduled to
2024.
take place in October
Il s'agit pour nous
2024.
d'une étape
For
fondamentale
us, this is a
dans notre
fundamental
marche
step
vers
in
l'ancrage
our
local
journey
de la démocratie,
towards
la
ensuring local
promotion de la
ownership of
gouvernance
democracy,
participative
the
et du
promotion of
développement local.
participatory governance
C'est en
and
cela
local development.
que nous voulons ces
It is in
élections
furtherance
locales
of these
inclusives,
goals that we wish to
transparentes,
have local elections which
pacifiques et
are
crédibles.
inclusive, transparent, peaceful and
J'exhorte
credible.
tous nos
I
partenaires
urge all of
à
our
soutenir
partners
le
to
gouvernement
support the government
pour l'achèvement du
to
processus
ensure
électoral si
the
bien
electoral
entamé.
process that has got off to
Je
such a good
souhaite
start
plein
successfully
succès à nos
concludes. I
travaux
wish us
et vous
every
remercie
success
pour
in our
votre
work
aimable
and I
attention.
thank you for your kind attention. I thank on behalf of the General Assembly the Head of State of the Central African Republic for the statement just made and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Lazarus McCarthy Chakwera, President of the Republic of Malawi and Commander-in-Chief of the Malawi Defense Force. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Lazarus McCarthy Chakwera, President of the Republic of Malawi and Commander-in-Chief of the Malawi Defense Force, and I invite him to address the Assembly.
Your Excellency, Mr. Dennis Francis, President of the 8th session of the United Nations General Assembly, Your Excellency, Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Your Excellencies, heads of state and government, and leaders of delegations, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. In less than 30 years, we will come to the halfway point of this century. And in less than 80 years, the 21st century will end. By that time, none of us will be president, and none of us will be alive. So when we stand at this podium and speak of the future, we speak of a future that does not belong to us. We speak of a future with sustainable development. We speak of a better world, not for us, but for our grandchildren and their children. And the decisions we make today, the actions we take each day, are what determine what kind of future we are creating for them. It is therefore not good enough to say that we must build trust in the world when we continue making decisions that undermine trust. It is not good enough to say that we want to reignite global solidarity when we continue to pick and choose whom we show solidarity with. It is not enough to say we want to move towards peace when our actions in other nations promote war and create the conditions for conflict. It is not good enough to say we want prosperity for all when our rules for trade and our financial systems are a recipe for deepening the poverty of other nations. Without changing our decisions, our positions, and our actions, the future we speak of today and the sustainable development we dream of achieving by 2030 will remain a reality on paper. And when it comes to urgent action, we must focus our attention, our energies, and our resources on the areas where we are falling behind. We must prioritize those places in the world that are most at risk of not achieving sustainability in any of the 17 SDGs. In the case of Malawi, the most pressing priorities are plain to see. As a nation, we took the SDGs and aligned our national aspirations to reflect them. So even though we have our sights set on the Malawi 2063 vision, we also created an implementation plan for the first 10 years that coincides with the decade of action on SDGs in the context of Agenda 2030. And our focus has already started yielding fruit, because in the past few years we have stayed on track with our quest to end hunger in line with SDG 2, to safeguard the good health and well-being of our citizens in line with SDG 3, to improve quality of education in line with SDG 4, to leverage Malawi's abundant water resources for better sanitation in line with SDG 6, and to promote life below water in line with SDG 14. Now, while we celebrate the progress we have made on these goals, with 7 years to go before the end of the decade of action on SDGs, we are not satisfied with seeing progress on only 5 out of 17 goals. In fact, not only do we need support with making gains in the areas where we are seeing little, but we even need urgent support with safeguarding the gains we have made in the areas where we are doing well. In short, we need urgent support in building resilience to inoculate our economy against the adverse effects of shocks. In 12 months since the last time I stood here, Malawi has had the worst cholera outbreak in its history, killing more people than COVID, a consequence of the contamination of water bodies and systems suffered when cyclones Ana and Gombe hit us 6 months before. In that time, Malawi has also had a drought in its northern region, resulting in the loss of half of our maize and 80% of our rice in one of the most productive districts in our country. In that time, Malawi has also come under assault by the worst cyclone on record, as Freddie made landfall twice and left a trail of death and destruction like you can't believe, killing over 1,000, displacing over 500,000, and washing away homes, roads, and bridges, businesses, and fields of crops that are a source of livelihood for over 2 million people. So when I say that our SDGs are under threat, the threat is real, and it is already here. What Malawi needs, therefore, is decision and action. We need decision and action on the climate financing that has thus far been nothing more than a promissory note from the developed countries responsible for sourcing or resourcing our efforts for mitigation, adaptation, and most urgently, loss and damage. We need decision and action on debt. For like most least developed countries, Malawi is in distress because its debt is unsustainable. And so our call to action on behalf of all LDCs on this matter remains the same. Cancel the dates. Cancel the dates. Cancel the dates. As a family of nations, we have already lost 2 years of progress during the decade of action due to economic shutdowns effected to contain COVID-19. And if you want the global economy to regain that lost ground, you must cancel the debts. We have lost another 2 years of progress during this decade of action due to economic disruptions caused by the war in Eastern Europe. And if you want to see LDCs catch up on SDGs, you must cancel the debts. That's a decision you can make today, an action you can take that would breathe oxygen into the suffocating economies of the global South. That's a decision you can make today so that the money being drained by servicing debts can go towards rebuilding roads, schools, hospitals, businesses, and livelihoods. For Malawi's part, we are committed to continue implementing reforms and policies aimed at building economic resilience against shocks. We are committed to continue engaging the United Nations and our development partners, both multilaterally as well as bilaterally, in mobilizing international support that goes beyond disaster management and seeks to build sustainability. We are committed to continue banging on the doors of financial institutions that remain too slow and too unresponsive and too rigid to address the existing financing gaps in the programs we have for achieving SDGs. We are committed to the principle of the UN Charter and to a rules-based international system, so long as we have the power to change the rules that have worked against us and held us back in terms of our development for decades. This is why Malawi strongly advocates for radical reform in the United Nations Security Council itself, whose very structure undermines the values of democracy, inclusivity, accountability, and trust. It is no accident that at this 78th session of the United Nations General Assembly, focused on rebuilding trust and solidarity, only one head of state from the permanent members of the UN Security Council showed up. That is not how you build trust. That is not how you show solidarity. That is not accountability. That is not leadership. As such, I believe President Biden said it so well here. And Malawi joins the United States in insisting that Africa must have a permanent seat on the UN Security Council with veto power, because without that level of inclusivity, rebuilding trust and reigniting global solidarity will be a challenge. One of the reasons we need a reformed United Nations is because we need a new development paradigm going beyond 2030. We need a development paradigm that takes on board the interests of the developing world in a spirit of true partnership. We need a development paradigm that places partnership at the heart of our quest for SDG achievement. We need a development paradigm that promotes competition in matters of human ingenuity, science, technology, and innovation, and not in matters of militarization and economic exploitation, which are just new forms of colonization. We need a new paradigm that celebrates and rewards the developed nations that fulfill their commitment to finance resilience projects in developing countries. We need a new paradigm that establishes effective carbon markets to empower developing nations like Malawi with resources necessary for achieving sustainability and implementing their national adaptation plans. We need a new paradigm that builds each continent's capacity to tackle future pandemics, including vaccine manufacturing capabilities and proactive pandemic preparedness. And most importantly, we need a new paradigm that unleashes the full potential of our youth and puts them in the driving seat of the vehicles we are using to reach our SDG targets. For the future we are chasing after is theirs and not ours. I thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Malawi and Commander-in-Chief of the Malawi Defense Force for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Taneti Mau, President, Head of Government and Minister for Foreign Affairs and Immigration of the Republic of Kiribati. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Tanetti Mau Mau, President, Head of Government and Minister for Foreign Affairs and Immigration of the Republic of Kiribati, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, UN Secretary General, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, allow me to share warm greetings from the government and the people of the Republic of Kiribati. In the name of the Almighty God, whom we place our trust in, and is our anchor of solidarity. Mr. President, I join previous speakers in congratulating you on your election, and I wish you every success as you guide these important deliberations. The theme, rebuilding trust and reigniting global solidarity for accelerating action on the 2030 Agenda and its Sustainable Development Goals toward peace, prosperity, progress, and sustainability for all resonates deeply with the aspirations of our people. In our fast-changing world, predicated by multiple challenges, part of the theme to rebuilding trust and reigniting global solidarity is very timely and crucial. As we all know, trust is the cornerstone of any relationship, that when strained, it creates uncertainties, mistrust, and instability. Geopolitical tensions, economic disparities, and the unforeseen challenges brought about by events like pandemics, climate change crisis, and disasters have tested the resolve of national governments, their peoples, and their partners. The call to rebuild trust, therefore, highlights the need for countries to establish faith in multilateral cooperation and diplomacy. It highlights the importance of transparent communication, mutual understanding, and engaging with each other to forge strategic partnerships for our common goal and development. Our renewed commitments to accountability, good governance, and responsive policies can contribute to a more engaged and empowered global community. At the same time, the call to reignite global solidarity reflects our recognition that our global challenges and opportunities are intertwined. It encourages countries not only to recognize, but also deliver actions to resolve issues such as poverty, inequality, climate change, and healthcare. The idea of global solidarity underscores the principle that no nation can thrive in isolation and recognizes the uniqueness of each country's context and need. The experience from COVID-19 pandemic is an exemplary of the world coming together as one family. When we recognize the essence of science, while we recognize the essence of science to address pandemics, it is important for member states to work together to gain a better understanding of the variants and vaccines before they are rolled out. Mr. President, since the launching of the SDGs in 2015, my government launched Kiribati's first ever long development plan, identifying our priorities for development. The Kiribati vision for 20 years is rooted firmly on the needs of all Kiribatis and commits my government to transform Kiribati into a wealthier, healthier, and peaceful nation. It recognizes the need to align our national priorities with the SDGs and complements our national efforts with those outlined by our UN family. In 2018, my government became one of the few member states that delivered a voluntary national report, VNR, outlining our policy actions to achieve our SDGs. The VNR enables us to take stock of our development and assess our future. To ensure sustainability and ownership of our desired developmental goals, we have engaged in extensive consultations at all levels. As the year 2030 is imminent, time is of the essence. It is imperative for our UN family to stay on track in our efforts to achieve our goals set forth in the SDGs. This entails setting ambitious targets and mobilizing resources, technology, innovation, and policy changes to ensure the goals are achieved on time. However, there is no guarantee that SDG goals will be achieved. Therefore, Kiribatis graduation from a least developed country would not be sustainable. Mr. President, since our independence in 1979, our nation has enjoyed 44 years of stable and peaceful governance. We continue to recognize the independence of the three arms of government, trusting that each arm discharges its duties with the highest level of integrity in a transparent, respectful, and honest manner. We are committed and determined to ensure that Kiribati remains peaceful as we chart our future. But peace can be precarious, as determining factors are often beyond our control. We have the human resources, yet lack the capacity or necessary skills to develop our country. Equally important is the commitment to maximize benefit to our people, uplift our communities, and maintain our cultural values for peace. During this year's National Day celebrations, after so many years, Kiribati, for the first time in history, successfully united all faith-based organizations to gather again as one family under one roof to worship God. All Christian denominations, including the Baha'i faith and Islam followers in Kiribati, rejoiced in songs of praise and in richness of prayers. During this worship, it was heartening to be in the atmosphere where one can truly feel the grace, peace, and love of God. Also, recognizing the greater humility of being an Kiribati is far more effective in sustaining peace rather than the differences in faith. We invite the rest of the world to follow this example. As part of our commitment to global peace, my government is working closely with the UN to engage our police in the UN peacekeeping missions and with the support of various partners. We will commit to support gender balance in recognition of Kiribati's ongoing commitment to equal representation and opportunities. In addition, Kiribati has strengthened its policies and laws to support and empower women and girls, people with disabilities, elders, the unemployed, youth, and children. Mr. President, we must recall our commitments under our UN Charter to build a safe, peaceful, and secure home for our peoples, individually as sovereign nations and collectively as members of the United Nations. In Kiribati, we strongly believe that this is deeply threatened and undermined by the continued existence of nuclear weapons, the discharge of nuclear-treated water, and the leakage of radioactive materials into the blue Pacific Ocean. The existence of nuclear weapons also diminishes trust in our UN family members on their commitments to peace and stability if they continue to manufacture and possess nuclear weapons. Kiribati will continue promoting the non-proliferation and ultimately the total elimination of nuclear weapons to our United Nations, and in particular, our obligations in keeping our region, our land, our harbor, airspace, and our ocean free of environmental destruction and pollution with radioactive waste and other materials, including plastics. Most importantly is the health of our people, especially those who were exposed to the nuclear test blast on Christmas Island, and those whose ancestral land have been exploited, leaving pinnacles behind. Compensations must be made to those on Christmas Island, including the Banabans people affected by environmental degradation, to rebuild trust. One of the global challenges and grave concerns that impacts our lives and future is corruption. The government recognizes that fighting corruption is critical to achieving sustainable development, and accordingly hosted the first ever regional anti-corruption conference for Pacific leaders in 2020. The outcome of this conference, Day Vision, reaffirms the Pacific unity against corruption, as well as integrating good governance principles into their broader developmental agenda. At the international level, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, along with the General Assembly, can lead the way by ensuring that anti-corruption efforts are prioritized in our development efforts, in our pursuit of global sustainable development, with SDG 16 as our guidepost. Mr. President, enhancing prosperity is essential for sustaining peace, and so the government is dedicated to people-centric principles, placing these citizens at the center of our decisions and services, and promoting transparent governance. We value continuous learning and capacity development for a competent public service to deliver on development goals. Building capacity and transfer of knowledge to enhance the capacity of our people is sustainable. This allows our people to take ownership of our own national processes and procedures, thus guiding our development. We acknowledge the support of our development partners, which needs to be well coordinated and harmonized to ensure fair and equal distribution and allocation of limited resources amongst competing needs. We are committed to expanding access to overseas labor market, providing decent working conditions and adhering to international labor standards. In education, we invest in our young generation and educators, support accessible, well-resourced schools for quality learning environments, and ensure equal access to high-quality education at all levels to nurture our people and advance our nation forward. Mr. President, in the pursuit of SDG acceleration, Kiribati is faced with significant challenges due to its geographical isolation, scatteredness of its islands within its 3.5 million square kilometers economic exclusive zone, and vulnerability to climate change, to name a few. Encountered with these significant challenges, delivery of essential services such as education, health, security, including the implementation of activities related to achieving SDGs in Kiribati, is very costly. We should be given increased access to financial resources to obtain equipment, infrastructure, and others to achieve SDGs and at the same time develop our country. This includes an urgent call to scale up global financial resources and simplifying guidelines to allow easy access. Achieving this guarantees Kiribati to be placed in a better position to sustain peace and harmony. With a vast ocean and airspace, Kiribati resources are central to our survival, development, and security. To harness our ocean resources sustainably, we need financial assistance and access to the right capabilities, technology, and equipment. Likewise, the management of our airspace is important for security purposes. This will enable us to effectively manage our maritime domain and airspace, ensuring responsible utilization while protecting our fragile ecosystem. At the front of climate change, Kiribati is experiencing intensifying severe drought, with coastal inundation affecting homes, public infrastructure, food, and water security. The projected cost for adaptation has significantly increased. Therefore, developed countries are urged to put more funds beyond the global pledge agreed to in Paris. This would also finance the loss and damage and facilitate investment in early warning systems and forecast. With that said, this would help our people adapt to the changing environmental conditions and to build resilience in our communities. Mr. President, sustainability has become the new governance imperative, which needs to be clearly understood. As leaders of today, it is vital to know exactly what we want to sustain, at what scale, and be wary of its implications. This will require us to be more diligent, patient, and not working with sheer determination, so sustainability of resources, efforts, and time is optimally maximized for the betterment of all. Before I conclude, Mr. President, I would like, on behalf of my government and the people of Kiribati, join previous speakers and excellencies in offering our condolences to the government and the people of Morocco and Libya for such a tragedy that they have faced. May God bless them. In conclusion, let's embrace our traditional blessings of the Maori, the Roi, or the Tabemoa, which literally means health, peace, and prosperity upon us all. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President, Head of Government, and Minister for Foreign Affairs and Immigration of the Republic of Kiribati for the statement just made. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly, the General Assembly, will now hear an address by His Excellency Emerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa, President of the Republic of Zimbabwe. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Emerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa, President of the Republic of Zimbabwe, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Your Excellency, Mr. Dennis Francis, President of the 78th Session of the United Nations General Assembly, Your Excellency, Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Your Majesties, Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, distinguished delegates, I wish to congratulate you, Mr. President, on your election as the President of the 78th Session of the United Nations General Assembly. We are confident that under your stewardship, we will make progress on the important global agenda before us. Please be assured of Zimbabwe's support throughout your tenure. I also pay special tribute to your predecessor, Mr. Korosi, for leading the 77th session of the General Assembly. We value the role he played to promote science,
in our overarching goal to improve the lives and livelihoods of all. Mr. President, it is imperative that we recommit to the Charter of the United Nations multilateralism, solidarity, justice, and the peaceful settlement of disputes for sustainable development and a shared future. This calls on us all to respect the sovereign equality of nations, big or small, poor or rich. By working together, we can harness our expertise and learn from one another to strengthen international institutions for the accelerated attainment of Agenda 2030. The impact of conflicts, terrorism, climate change-induced natural disasters, biodiversity loss, and the rising prevalence of disease and pandemics, especially in the developing world, urgent attention. Regrettably, progress towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals has been uneven, while global solidarity has been tasted and the self-interest superseding cooperation. We have a duty to reignite our commitment to the principles of the 2030 Agenda and rekindle the spirit of multilateralism. To accelerate our action on the SDGs, we must scale up investments in people and communities by ensuring access to quality education, health care, clean water, and sanitation for all. The creation of economic opportunities, decent jobs, and entrepreneurship, especially among women and youth, must remain a priority. Excellencies, Zimbabwe continues to entrench democracy, constitutionalism, good governance, and the rule of law following the recently held 2023 harmonized general elections. I am pleased to highlight that our country enjoyed peace before, during, and after our free, fair, transparent, and credible elections. Zimbabwe has been under the illegal unilateral economic sanctions for 23 years, imposed by some Western countries. These sanctions were designed to subjugate the sovereign will of the Zimbabwean people. We therefore demand that the unjustified unilateral sanctions be unconditionally lifted, including those imposed on countries like Cuba. We remain grateful for the support and solidarity of progressive countries in the Committee of Nations. In spite of these debilitating sanctions, the people of Zimbabwe have become masters of their destiny. This is anchored on a philosophy that, as a people, we have the duty and responsibility of developing our country using our own domestic resources. Partners and investors are welcome, but guided by our own vision and national priority areas. We are recording unprecedented development and economic success milestones. For the last 3 years, our country has been the fastest growing economy in our Southern Africa region. Further, Zimbabwe is prioritizing the eradication of poverty and improving the quality of life of our people, particularly those in rural areas. The empowerment and the capacitation of communal and small-scale farmers has seen us realize food and nutrition security at both household and national level. With effect from this year, our country will become a net exporter of wheat. Zimbabwe has not been spared from the negative impact of climate change. Hence, my government continues to make the requisite investment in infrastructure to mitigate and build resilience towards climate change adaptation. Dams are being built across the country. In addition, we have begun an ambitious and yet achievable program to sink solar-powered balls in each of our country's 35,000 rural villages and schools. Alongside each of these water points are commercial nutritional gardens for the empowerment of our women and youth. Through the use of our own resources, we have constructed an unprecedented number of schools, clinics, and provided other social amenities throughout our communities. Mr. President, today's realities across all regions bring to the fore the importance of global solidarity. No nation, no matter how powerful, can stand alone to realize sustainable and inclusive development. The high-level meetings on universal health coverage, tuberculosis and pandemic prevention, preparedness and response are welcome opportunities to reflect on the importance of maintaining essential services during pandemics and health emergencies. The realization of affordable and quality health delivery, as outlined under SDG 3, is a key deliverable for my administration. Science, technology, and innovation are essential ingredients to leapfrog the modernization and industrialization of developing countries. To this end, Zimbabwe continues to reap the benefits of a comprehensive and transformative heritage-based higher education curriculum. The innovation hubs and industrial parks established within institutions of higher education have refocused young people in our tertiary institutions towards developing and producing goods and services. Allow me to reaffirm that Zimbabwe is actually open for business. Mr. President, building resilience and tackling the adverse impact of climate change should be an urgent priority for us all. In the case of Zimbabwe and the Southern Africa region, floods and droughts have affected the livelihoods of many while hindering progress on national development. May I express my deepest condolences and sympathies to the government and peoples of the Kingdom of Morocco and the State of Libya on the recent loss of lives as a result of the devastating impact of climate change. There is need for concrete climate action as opposed to mere promises, so that we strengthen our adaptation, resilience, and mitigation mechanisms. We must transition to a low-carbon and resilient global economy by increasing investments in renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, and green infrastructure. Commitments made under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement must be honored to deliver climate justice. It is our hope that progress will be made to operationalize the loss and damage fund. Zimbabwe is implementing a climate change policy and response strategy, while disaster management and the early warning systems continue to be strengthened. Mr. President, the need to reform global financial institutions is of essence to unlock funding for developing countries. The current exclusionary architecture, dominated by a few states, is failing to deliver the requisite resources for countries to finance their developmental priorities and other pressing health and environmental challenges. The shortcomings in the last round of SDR allocations should be addressed. Zimbabwe supports the stimulus package proposed by the United Nations Secretary General. We further call for the long-term concessional loans, increased access to unused special drawing rights, as well as the use of modalities such as debt cancellation and restructuring as a stimulus for developing countries to grow their economies and build greater resilience. We strongly condemn tendencies by some powerful countries who preach peace, human rights, and democracy, and yet clandestinely fund conflicts and the unconstitutional change of governments for their own narrow interests. We further condemn the use of unilateral and illegal sanctions as a foreign policy tool at the disposal of some powerful nations, such as those sanctions imposed on Zimbabwe and the countries like Cuba. Such actions hamper the trust, global solidarity, and the multilateralism we desire. It is important that we channel our collective efforts towards building peace and driving forward our development agenda for shared prosperity. There is much more that unites us than that which divides us. Similarly, the establishment of a fair and inclusive global security architecture has become urgent. The maintenance of peace and security should never be the preserve of a privileged few. Zimbabwe reaffirms calls by Africa for the reform of the United Nations Security Council in line with Ezulwini Consensus and the CITE Declaration. Mr. President, allow me to conclude by reaffirming Zimbabwe's commitment to the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter as we implement our Global Agenda 2030. Collectively, let us restore human dignity, peace, security, and stability while safeguarding our planet for the shared prosperity of present and future generations. Together in unity and harmony, we are stronger. I thank you for listening.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency José Ramos Horta, President of the Democratic Republic of Timor-Leste. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency José Ramos Horta, President of the Democratic Republic of Timor-Leste, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Thank you, President.
Thank you, Mr. President.
To greet in Tetu language the Derk Manek, in Portuguese, Bon dia, in Bahasa Indonesia, Selamat pagi, in English, of course, good morning. I begin my speech in English. In Portuguese, Excelências, somos uma democracia jovem.
Excellencies, we are young, imperfect, and vibrant democracy, an oasis of peace, tolerance and freedom. Since our independence in 2002, our democracy has evolved. It is alive and dynamic. The Economist magazine's Democracy Index rates Timor-Leste as the most democratic country in Southeast Asia. The Reporters Without Borders organization, in their most recent World Press Freedom Index, places Timor-Leste in the 10th global position in freedom of the press. We are a multicultural, multi-religious, multilingual, and multi-ethnic society. With humility, we continue to build a country that is open to the world, tolerant, free of hate and violence. A 98% majority of practicing Catholics live in harmony with our Protestant and Muslim brothers and sisters. Timor-Leste has no political violence, nor tensions or crimes based on ethnicity or religion. We have no domestic organized crime, nor armed robberies. Despite a significant reduction in poverty, multidimensional poverty remains high. around 45.8%, and even higher among children. To bring our population out of extreme poverty, food insecurity, neonatal mortality, rickets, and child malnutrition, and to provide care for children and their mothers are some of the challenges that we are determined to directly confront in the next 5 years. For this reason, child malnutrition and access to preschool education are two of our key priorities. In collaboration with UNICEF, our government plans to implement an intersectoral early childhood development policy in order to drive investments in a child's initial years and build a solid basis for social and human capital. We have a high and unacceptable incidence of domestic violence. However, UN Union has recognized that Timor-Leste is taking significant steps to implement legal frameworks and international policies, including CEDAW, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and Security Council Resolution 1325, in order to promote gender equality and women's empowerment. We are an observer state at ASEAN, with the right to participate in all summits of heads of state and government, as well as meetings of ministers, high authorities, and technical staff. During the last 20 years since our independence, and in the 10 years since we formally applied for ASEAN membership, most economic and social indicators show significant progress, including in life expectancy, which was below 60 years in 2002 and is now risen to 70 years, reduced poverty and child mortality, 21 doctors in 2002, and now more than 1,200. In 2002, the capital had partial power coverage, while the rest of the country did not have such privilege. Currently, power is available in 96.1% of our territory. We are very grateful for the Asian leaders' unanimous decision to grant observer status to Timor-Leste, a pathway to membership, and a broad support package to continue to build our staff and diplomats' skills. We do not depend on foreign aid, and we are eternally grateful to those who helped us when our needs were greatest. We finance our own national budget with the returns from a sovereign fund invested in U.S. Treasury bonds and in global financial markets, with an annual return in excess of 9%. Timor-Leste is an active member of the community of Portuguese-speaking countries and a co-founder of the international G7+ group, which was established in 2010 in Dili and is formed by 20 countries affected by conflicts.
Ukraine and the resulting geopolitical fragmentation have disproportionately impacted the already fragile and conflict-affected countries. They have always felt the brunt of every global crisis. On the other hand, these countries are the least responsible for those crises. The incidents of extreme hunger, poverty, and the humanitarian crisis caused by wars, climate change, and geoeconomic fragmentation are increasingly concentrated in fragile and conflict-affected countries. Armed conflicts proliferate, and economic and social conditions are worsening in countries around the world. But we seem to have forgotten the children of the tragedies of Myanmar, Afghanistan, Yemen, Syria, Palestine, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The growing tensions among regional and global powers are eroding the potential of our collective security institutions at a time when we face existential challenges. We cannot accept the incomprehensible anachronisms such as the embargo imposed on the Cuban people, or the continuing impasse of the Western Sahara conflict, or the blatant disregard of UN resolutions on the two-state solution for Israel and Palestine. On and off, we hear about the need to reform the UN Security Council. Academics concoct an expanded Security Council, regurgitate ideas for a more representative body reflecting today's demographics. which is in itself an almost surreal task, bearing in mind that leaders up to the present have not ended nuclear arms race, remain the biggest arms merchants of death, led in the desecration of Mother Nature, failed to help the poorest out of poverty, have not shown wisdom in writing off the debt incurred by countries of the poorer South, burdens caused by loan sharks from Western commercial banks. Children living in conflict zones continue to come under attack on an alarming scale. Recent years have seen an exacerbation of children's vulnerability to grave violation. In Myanmar, unable to control the ground, the military pursue a scorched earth strategy with widespread use of aircraft, helicopter targeting civilians across the country. At least 3,000 civilians have been killed and 70,000 people arbitrarily imprisoned, including the legitimately elected leaders such as Nobel laureate Aung San Suu Kyi. Timor-Leste condemned the invasion, violation of sovereignty, territorial integrity of Ukraine, and the ongoing war with its catastrophic consequences for the Ukrainian people, but also for the Russians and for the rest of the world, with the disruption of global trade in grain and energy. We know from experience and history that very seldom wars are won on the battlefield. Miscalculation, false pride prevail, and the war goes on for years. Killings and utter destruction continue until exhaustion. Only then the sides involved decide to begin negotiations on a peace settlement. Why not talk now? Excellencies, people living in fragile circumstances already feel the effects of climate change most severely. We need a new outlook on the climate and security nexus, which will address the impact of climate change and environmental degradation on peace, security, and ensure that the quest for energy transition does not worsen the security situation in vulnerable and fragile countries. Therefore, we would propose a bold initiative. The initiative seeks to accelerate the just energy transition in fragile developing states that heavily rely on oil and gas production to prevent turmoil and unrest. The combined efforts of unlocking finance through debt alleviation, streamlining international finance at lowest interest rates, and significantly increase official development assistance will empower these nations to embark on projects that foster development of clean industries, address the ongoing loss and damage related to climate change, facilitate their efforts in greenhouse mitigation and adaptation to climate change. While initiatives to further the just transition exist, they do not pay enough attention to either fragile or vulnerable states nor to LDCs and SIDS. As a second priority, this initiative will pay urgent attention to particular challenges faced by fragile states that are not only susceptible to fragility and vulnerability on their own, but where there is heightened risk when faced with any massive economic turmoil, which the green transition, if not handled carefully, would increase. Thirdly, as the urgency to transition to low-carbon economy and clean energy accelerate, this initiative will seek to ensure that the quest for rare earth elements and critical minerals does not lead to further instability nor promote weak governance or exacerbate local tensions nor grievances in the countries where strategic reserves of such elements and minerals are found. This initiative seeks to create a brighter and more sustainable future for our planet and all inhabitants by facilitating the energy transition in small island states, LDCs, and climate-vulnerable nations. We aim to mitigate climate change impacts and preserve our shared global environment for generations to come. The super-rich CEO of banks and credit countries, in the face of agony of poverty, rising costs in the most impoverished countries, remain indifferent to the calls for debt cancellation. I'm stating here to banks and other credit institutions, cancel off this damn debt. It would be a leap forward in international solidarity if all OECD countries were to allocate 1% of their national GDP to ODA. We would see positive effects on poverty rates, food security, access to basic health services, education, electricity, drinking water, sanitation, housing, or social security, with multiplier effects on the diversification of economies, especially in agriculture. We live in a world full of dualities, an increasing prosperous world whose wealth has increased by 30 trillion a year, according to Nobel Prize winner Kailash Satyarthi, but the leaderships of the G7 or G20 fail to reflect this in the fight against hunger, stunting, and other forms of multidimensional poverty. We need to adopt a universal child benefit, a new ODA target for a fair share for children, targeting particularly children in fragile, low-income countries. Excellence, allow me to remind you the story that is no longer part of our daily conversation, the story of the 3-year-old Aylan Kurdi, an innocent Syrian child whose lifeless body washed ashore near the Turkish resort town of Bodrum in September 2005. And how many of us pain at the sight of children dying every day of hunger and in the other ongoing wars. In centuries past, the Atlantic Ocean was the graveyard of African slaves, and those who survived the voyage built new countries with their sweat and blood. In this 21st century, the Mediterranean Sea is the new graveyard of thousands of Africans fleeing drought, extreme poverty, and conflicts. Excellencies, no one should fear the Chinese, Indian, European, American superpowers. Rather, we should welcome the positive reality of global countries that share with us diasporas, cultures, and interests in well-being or security that are deeply intertwined with our own. We can gain more from the free movement of people and goods than from building concrete walls. We all benefit from the impressive Indian transformation into a global economic success story. India has an admirable track record of decades of practical solidarity with other developing countries, even during the early stages of its own development. Equally, we want to see prosperity in Europe, in Japan, South Korea, Australia. But their continuing prosperity depends on peace and stability in the global South, depends on our markets, workforce, and providers of raw wealth, which they process and re-export. But this unequal relationship has to change, and will change only when we invest more in high-quality education and health for our children and youth, when we invest more in science and technology. We have the chance of the century to build a new partnership of equals between the rich, super rich of the North and us in the periphery, with a renewed spirit of mission around the global causes of nature and human survival. Failing this, we will sink together, rich and poor, the weak and the powerful. May God bless us all. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Democratic Republic of Timor-Leste for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Salva Kiir Mayardit, President of the Republic of South Sudan. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Salva Kiir Mayardit, President of the Republic of South Sudan, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Your Excellency, Denis Francis, President of the 78th session of the UN General Assembly, Your Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Your Majesties, Your Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, before my remarks, I would like to express my heartfelt condolences to the people of the Kingdom of Morocco and the Republic of Libya who have lost their loved ones in the recent natural calamities. South Sudan stands in solidarity with them during this difficult moment in their respective countries. Excellencies, on behalf of the people and government of the Republic of South Sudan, I stand before you today to reaffirm our commitment to world peace and security. We are committed to global efforts aimed at addressing challenges that we face as a human family. We are also committed to multilateralism and international cooperation as the best means of achieving our shared aspirations. Within this context, we are hopeful that together we can rebuild trust among member states and reignite global solidarity on the basis of sovereign equality of all states, as enshrined in the founding charter of this esteemed organization. Excellencies, we recognize the urgency of challenges before us. We are also aware of concerted action required to address these challenges in order to ensure a better future for the coming generations. To this effect, South Sudan has developed sustainable development goals, rescue plan with the focus on 7 SDG targets. This plan provides a roadmap of a better future for our people. And given that education is the key that will allow us to achieve our SDGs rapidly, I am pleased to report that South Sudan has made some progress in its education sector. Since our independence in 2011, Our Constitution, for example, guarantees all children free access to education. We have also designated education as a human right of every child. In February this year, I directed the Ministry of Education to implement free primary and secondary education policy across the country. This policy has directly led to enrollment of 2.3 million children in our schools. To ensure that girls stay in schools, we have banned child marriages through an act of parliament. More importantly, we have increased education budget with the goal of paying teachers a living wage. In the health sector, we plan to dedicate resources towards providing affordable and standard health care, and this will be done through primary health care approach that is inclusive and cost-effective. Excellencies, on climate change, South Sudan is dedicated to addressing its adverse impact. We plan to prioritize sustainable and use sustainable land use, promote renewable energy, and collaborate with international partners to reduce carbon emissions and protect our environment for generations to come. While working on this, it is only fair for us to call upon developed countries to cut their emission by 45% and honor their pledges of availing funds for mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage to the developing countries. With the recently concluded Africa Climate Summit held in Nairobi, Kenya, it is high time that the declaration of the summit forms the new crisis for rebuilding trust and regaining global solidarity for attaining the 2030 Agenda. Excellencies, we acknowledge the political, humanitarian, and security challenges we have faced as a country since 2013. However, we have turned the corner with the signing of the revitalized peace agreement in 2018. Now we are determined to build on the commitments of our revised national development strategy 2021 to 2024 to consolidate peace and stabilize the economy. Ongoing public, financial, management reforms, and recently concluded National Economic Conference from solid basis for sound management of public resources for the benefit of our citizens. What remains now is to fast-track the implementation of the remaining provisions in the agreement in order to conclude the transitional period peacefully through fair, transparent, and credible elections in 2024. We have also managed to engage in dialogue and consultation with the various stakeholders, including civil society, women, youth, traditional leaders, and opposition groups to ensure that our peace process is owned and driven by our own people. As we move in this direction, we call upon the United Nations to lift the arms embargo imposed on us to aid peace implementation and to secure the elections. The arms embargo has impeded the implementation of security arrangements because effective deployment of the unified forces which we have graduated cannot happen without arms. Excellencies, as the country sharing the border with the Republic of Sudan, South Sudan has received thousands of Sudanese refugees and our returnees since the conflict broke out in the Sudan in April 2023. This influx has overwhelmed our border communities and created a humanitarian crisis. I'm appealing to the international community to avail resources to help refugees and displaced persons who crossed into South Sudan. While the world is dealing with multiple crises, we call for a provision of sustained support to these displaced persons as we work on how to restore peace and stability in Sudan. In closing, South Sudan stands before this esteemed assembly as a resolute partner in the collective pursuit of a better future for all. I extend our hand of friendship to fellow member states, international organizations, and civil society. Thank you very much and for your kind attention to these new remarks. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of South Sudan for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Mamadi Doumbouya, President of the National Committee for the Reconciliation and Development, President of the Republic of Guinea, Head of State. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Mamadi Doumbouya, President of the National Committee for Reconciliation and Development, President of the Republic of Guinea, Head of State, and I invite him to address the Assembly.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, heads of delegations, Mr. Secretary General, at the outset, Mr. President, I would like to extend the warm congratulations of the Guinean delegation on your brilliant election to the presidency of the 78th session of the United Nations General Assembly. Before this august assembly, I would also like to assure you of my country's support. I take this opportunity to also pay a well-deserved tribute to your predecessor, Mr. Sabakorsi of Hungary. To Mr. Secretary General Antonio Guterres, I extend my gratitude for the dedication with which he leads our organization. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, in coming to take part in the work of the 78th regular session of the General Assembly, I am fulfilling a duty, that of conveying the warm greetings of the sovereign people of Guinea. My country continues to place hope in the United Nations to find appropriate solutions to the issues our world continues to face. In this context, Mr. President, we believe that the fundamentals which underpinned the creation of our organization must adapt to the profound changes in our society. The theme of the session, peace, prosperity, progress, and sustainability, is topical, evocative, and deserves particular attention on our part.